I'll be honest with you. I thought my husband was hiding an affair, but what I found first was worse, because it proved he had watched me suffer while sitting on more than $200,000. The bank statement came on the same day my debit card was declined at Target for a cart that held laundry detergent, cheap coffee, and a clearance pack of socks for our daughter. I stood there with people waiting behind me, my face burning while the cashier quietly tried the card again, and I remember apologizing as if I had done something wrong. By the time I got home, I had already decided not to tell Daniel, because lately every conversation about money ended with him sighing like my needs were the reason our life was falling apart. For almost 3 years, he had told me we were barely surviving. He said his bonuses had dried up after the housing market shifted. He said the medical bills from my surgery had done more damage than we realized. He said the savings account was empty, the credit cards were dangerous, and if I wanted our daughter Sophie to stay in her dance program, then I needed to get realistic about what families like ours could afford. So I got realistic. I canceled my dental appointment after cracking a molar on a popcorn kernel. I stopped buying lunch at work and ate peanut butter sandwiches in my car behind the dental office. I told Sophie we would do something special at home instead of summer camp, then cried in the laundry room after she said it was okay because she knew Daddy was stressed about money. That afternoon, when I carried the mail inside our house in Charlotte, I was still thinking about the socks I had left behind at Target. The envelope was plain white, almost forgettable, with the name of a private bank printed in the corner. I nearly tossed it into Daniel's pile without opening it, but something about the address line stopped me. It had his full name, our home address, and underneath that, in smaller print, the words Wealth Management Services. Wealth. That word felt obscene in my kitchen. I opened it because I was angry, not because I expected anything useful. I thought maybe it was one more bill, one more warning, one more piece of proof that I had failed to keep our family afloat. Instead, I found an account summary. Daniel's name was at the top. The balance was $203,418.72. For several seconds, I honestly believed I was reading it wrong, because my mind could not place that number inside the same life where I had been watering down shampoo and pretending off-brand cereal was a fun experiment. I sat at the kitchen table with my coat still on, rain dripping from my hair onto the paper, and read the statement again until the digits stopped looking like a mistake. $200,000. Not hidden in theory. Not promised someday. Sitting there in an account I had never heard about, while Daniel told me we could not replace the tires on my car until spring. The statement listed recent transfers, and one line made my stomach tighten before I understood why. $5,000 had been sent 3 days earlier to someone named Marissa Vale. I did not know a Marissa Vale, but I knew what secret money looked like when another woman's name appeared beside it. That was the moment the house seemed to change around me. The kitchen island where Sophie did homework, the refrigerator covered in school photos, the little ceramic bowl where Daniel dropped his keys every night. All of it suddenly looked like part of a stage set built to convince me we were still a normal family. When Daniel came home, he was in a good mood. That almost broke me more than if he had walked in guilty. He kissed Sophie on the top of her head, asked if I had made dinner, and complained about traffic while hanging his coat in the hallway like nothing in the world had shifted. I watched him loosen his tie, the same tie I had ironed that morning, and wondered how many times he had looked me in the eye after moving money into a life I knew nothing about. I waited until Sophie went upstairs. Then I placed the bank statement on the table between us. Daniel looked down at it, and the color left his face so quickly that I knew, before he said a word, that there was no innocent explanation. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Not "what is this?" Not "there must be a mistake." Where did you get this? That was the first confession. I tapped the balance with one finger. "You told me we were broke." He stared at the paper for a long moment, then rubbed both hands over his face like he was tired of a burden I had just discovered. "Claire, this is complicated." I almost laughed, but my throat felt too tight. "Then start with Marissa Vale." His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in them. Before he could answer, his phone lit up on the table, and a message appeared across the screen from the same name on the transfer. "Marissa, please tell me Claire didn't open the statement." For a moment, neither of us moved. The phone lay on the kitchen table between us, still glowing with Marissa Vale's message, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a marriage could remain standing through years of stress, bills, illness, and silence, only to collapse under one sentence from a woman I had never met. Please tell me Claire didn't open the statement. Daniel reached for the phone, but I got there first. He did not grab my wrist or raise his voice, because Daniel never liked looking cruel in ways other people could name. Instead, he leaned forward with that careful, controlled expression he used whenever he wanted me to feel unreasonable before I had even spoken. Claire, he said, don't do this like that. I looked at him over the screen. Like what? Like you're looking for the worst possible answer. That was almost funny, considering the worst possible answer had just texted him at our kitchen table. I opened the message thread. At first, I expected hearts, photographs, something obvious and humiliating enough to make the situation simple. But what I found was worse because it looked less like an affair and more like a life being managed. There were messages about transfers, school pickup, a delayed closing date, someone named Noah, and a line from Daniel that made my stomach go cold. I can't move more this month. Claire is watching every dollar. I read it twice. Not because I did not understand it, but because understanding it meant accepting that my suffering had been part of their conversation. Every coupon I clipped, every bill I postponed, every time I apologized to Sophie for something we could not afford, Daniel had not been helpless beside me. He had been reporting my desperation to another woman like a problem in his schedule. Who is Noah? I asked. Daniel looked away, and that small movement told me the truth had roots. Claire, I need you to listen before you react. I hated how familiar that sounded. For years, he had treated my reactions as the danger, never the thing that caused them. If I cried over money, I was overwhelmed. If I questioned a charge, I was suspicious. If I asked why he had changed the password to our banking app, I was creating stress in a house that already had too much of it. So I held the phone tighter and said, "No, you're going to answer before I decide what kind of reaction you deserve." His face hardened just slightly. That was the first time I saw anger break through his panic. "Marissa is someone I helped," he said. "With $5,000? It wasn't just 5,000. The words slipped out before he could stop them. I stared at him, waiting, and for a second the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator and Sophie's footsteps moving across the floor upstairs. Our daughter was probably brushing her teeth, probably thinking tomorrow would be a normal school day, probably believing her parents were downstairs discussing boring adult things like dinner leftovers and permission slips. Daniel sat down slowly, as if sitting might make him look calmer. "She was in trouble when I met her," he said. "She had a child, no support, and a landlord threatening to evict her. I helped her because I could. Because I could." The phrase entered my chest like a blade. He could help another woman with rent, groceries, school fees, and whatever else those transfers meant. But he could watch me stand in the kitchen crying over a declined card and say we needed discipline. He could move thousands of dollars to Marissa Vale, but he could let our daughter pretend she did not want dance classes anymore because she had heard us whispering about the cost. "You told me we were broke," I said. His eyes flashed. "We had obligations. He breathed in sharply, and I could see him choosing his next words with care. "It's complicated." "No," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Complicated is when the water heater breaks the same month property taxes are due. Complicated is choosing between new brakes and a medical bill. This is not complicated, Daniel. This is secret." That landed. For the first time, he looked wounded, and it made me furious that some part of him still believed he had the right to be hurt by the shape of my words. I scrolled farther up the messages. There was one from Marissa 2 weeks earlier. "Noah asked why you don't sleep here anymore." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I looked at Daniel, and suddenly all the ordinary pieces of the last few years rearranged themselves. The late meetings, the weekend client emergencies, the business trips that were close enough to drive but somehow still required overnight bags. The way he came home smelling like someone else's laundry detergent and blamed it on hotel sheets. "Does she think you live with her?" I asked. Daniel closed his eyes. I almost wished he had lied better, because that silence felt like being pushed underwater. "Claire," he said, "I never meant for it to get this far." There it was, the coward's confession, dressed up as regret. Not "I chose this." Not "I lied to you." Not "I stole years of peace from you and Sophie." Just a vague little tragedy that had apparently happened around him while he stood nearby, helpless and misunderstood. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from Marissa. Daniel, if she knows about the money, she'll find the house too. I stopped breathing. The house. Not hotel rooms. Not cash gifts. Not a woman he helped once and then could not untangle himself from. A house. I looked up at him, and this time he looked afraid in a way that did not belong to guilt. It belonged to a man who had hidden an entire doorway inside his life, and just heard the hinges start to break. What house? I asked. He reached across the table, not for the phone this time but for me. I pulled my hand back before he could touch me. What house, Daniel? His mouth opened, but before he could answer, Sophie's bedroom door creaked upstairs, and her small voice floated down through the hallway. Mom? Why is Dad crying? Sophie's question floated down the stairs so softly that, for one terrible second, I wished I could pretend I had not heard it, because there are moments in a family when the truth is already too large for the adults, and yet a child still manages to walk right into the center of it without understanding what has been broken. Daniel wiped his face quickly, as if tears could be erased before they became evidence, and when he called back that everything was fine, his voice carried that same gentle fatherly tone I had trusted for years. That hurt almost more than the messages, because he still knew how to sound safe while standing in the middle of a lie that had been stealing from us in every direction. I went upstairs before he could say anything else and found Sophie standing in the hallway in her pajamas, holding the stuffed rabbit she had slept with since kindergarten. Her eyes moved from my face to the kitchen below, and I could tell she had heard enough to know that fine was not the truth, even if she was too young to understand the shape of what was happening. Dad and I are talking about something serious, I told her, keeping my voice calm with the kind of effort that made my chest ache. But you are safe, and none of this is your fault. She nodded, but she did not look convinced, and I hated Daniel for forcing me to offer comfort without explanation. After I tucked her back into bed, I stood in the hallway for a moment with one hand on her door, listening to the house I had spent years trying to protect, and I realized that Daniel had not just hidden money from me. He had made me the last person to know the truth about my own life. When I came back downstairs, he was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, looking like a man who had been caught in something tragic instead of something chosen. The bank statement was still between us, the phone was still unlocked beside it, and Marissa's last message about the house glowed on the screen like a door he had forgotten to lock. Where is it? I asked. He did not look up. Claire, please don't do this tonight. You already did this tonight, I said, and my voice surprised me because it sounded steadier than I felt. You did it every time you told me we had nothing while you were paying for someone else's home. He said the house was not what I thought, which was the kind of sentence guilty people use when the truth is exactly what you think but they want time to sand down the edges. He told me Marissa had needed stability, that Noah had needed a safe neighborhood, that he had been trying to prevent a crisis from becoming worse. Every word was wrapped in concern, but underneath it I heard the same old message. Other people's needs had been urgent, while mine had been negotiable. I asked him if he loved her. He looked toward the dark kitchen window instead of answering, and the reflection staring back at me looked older than the woman who had opened the mail that afternoon. I could see my damp hair, my tired eyes, my sweater stretched at the sleeves, and behind me the husband who had trained me to feel guilty for needing groceries while he moved thousands of dollars through an account with my name nowhere on it. Did you buy the house? I asked. Daniel swallowed. I helped with the down payment. How much? He hesitated long enough to make the number dangerous. $75,000. The room seemed to narrow around me, because that was almost exactly the amount he had claimed we lost to taxes and medical bills after my surgery. I remembered apologizing to him for being sick, actually apologizing, because the bills had seemed to make him so tense that I felt responsible for the pressure on his shoulders. For a while after that, neither of us spoke, and I did something that felt strange even as I did it. I stopped asking him for permission to know things. I picked up his phone, searched the messages for the address, wrote it down, and handed the phone back to him without caring whether he thought I was invading his privacy. There was no privacy left in a marriage where he had already built another family inside our bank account. The next morning, after dropping Sophie at school with a smile that felt stapled to my face, I drove to the address before I could talk myself out of it. The house was only 26 minutes away, close enough that Daniel could have kissed us goodbye after breakfast, driven to them, and still made a noon meeting without anyone suspecting a thing. It was a small blue house on a quiet street lined with maple trees, the kind of house young families buy when they are still proud of porch lights, flower boxes, and the possibility of becoming happy. There was a child's red scooter tipped over near the walkway, a little pair of rain boots beside the door, and pale curtains in the front window that looked new enough to still hold their creases. I parked across the street and told myself I only needed to see it once. Then Daniel's truck turned onto the street. I watched him pull into the driveway carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a cardboard tray of coffees in the other, as if he had made this trip so many times that his body no longer carried any guilt with it. Before he even reached the porch, the front door opened, and a little boy ran outside with such complete joy on his face that I knew the truth before he said anything. "Daddy." Daniel bent down and lifted him easily, naturally, with the practiced tenderness of a man who belonged there. The sound went through me in a way I still cannot describe, because the little boy was innocent, and that made my anger lose its clean edges. He had Daniel's dark hair, Daniel's smile, and the same dimples Sophie had when she was younger. For one awful moment I could not hate him, could not hate Marissa, could not even fully hate Daniel, because all I could see was a child reaching for his father. Then Marissa stepped onto the porch. She was younger than me, but not by much, with tired eyes, bare feet, and the guarded expression of a woman who had learned to expect disappointment. When she saw my car across the street, her smile faded, and Daniel turned so quickly that coffee spilled over his hand. My phone buzzed a second later. "Daniel, do not come over here." I read the message, looked at the house my sacrifices had helped pay for, then opened my car door and crossed the street before fear could make me obedient again. Daniel moved toward me first, his face tense and warning, but I looked past him at Marissa and said, "I'm Claire. I'm his wife." The color drained from her face so completely that I knew, before she spoke, that he had lied to her too. "That's impossible," she whispered, backing toward the doorway as if the porch had shifted under her feet. "He showed me the papers you signed." For a few seconds, the only thing I could hear was the rain ticking softly against the leaves above us, because Marissa's words had landed in the space between us with such quiet force that even Daniel seemed unable to move. "He showed me the papers you signed." That sentence did something worse than confirm the affair. It suggested that somewhere, in some drawer or folder or email attachment, there was a version of my life where I had already agreed to disappear. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time since opening the bank statement, I saw the real shape of his fear. He was not afraid that I had discovered Marissa, or even the money, because men like Daniel can always dress betrayal up as confusion, loneliness, pressure, or bad timing. He was afraid I had reached the part of the lie that could no longer be explained as emotion. Paper had a memory. Paper could testify. "What papers?" I asked. Marissa looked from me to Daniel, her face tightening as if she had just realized she was standing on a floor someone else had built over a hole. The little boy, Noah, was still holding onto Daniel's pant leg, watching us with wide, uncertain eyes, and the sight of him kept slicing through my anger because none of this was his fault. Daniel lowered his voice. "Claire, not here." I almost smiled because I had heard that line so many times in different costumes. "Not here. Not now. Not in front of Sophie. Not when I'm tired. Not when you're upset. Not before I've had time to make you question yourself." But this time there was nowhere private enough for him to control the truth. Marissa stepped back through the doorway and returned holding a folder against her chest. Her hands were trembling, and whatever hatred I had been trying to gather for her started to shift into something more complicated, because she did not look like a woman defending a stolen man. She looked like someone watching her own home turn into evidence. "He told me you were divorced," she said, her voice thin and unsteady. "He said you kept the house in Charlotte, and he kept some of the investment money. He said everything was settled before Noah was even born." I stared at her. Before Noah was born. That meant Daniel had not simply hidden an affair that became a child. He had created an entire legal fiction around me, years earlier, while I was still standing beside him at school concerts, folding his shirts, making dentist appointments, and thanking him for handling paperwork I was too exhausted to read. Marissa opened the folder and pulled out a stapled packet. The top page had my name on it. Separation agreement. My full legal name was typed neatly beneath Daniel's, followed by our address, our daughter's name, and a date from 4 years ago. I remembered that month immediately because it was the month after my surgery, when I could barely climb the stairs without stopping halfway to breathe. Daniel had taken over the bills then, telling me to rest, telling me not to worry, telling me that the best thing I could do for our family was heal. Apparently, while I was healing, he was writing me out of my own marriage. I took the packet from Marissa and turned to the signature page. There it was. My name. Close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in the places only I would notice. The C was too tight, the last letter of my maiden name connected when I never connected it, and the entire signature had a carefulness mine never had because I always signed too quickly, impatient with forms and school permission slips and medical papers. That's not mine, I said. Marissa's mouth parted slightly. He told me you signed it in mediation. I looked at Daniel, who was still holding Noah's hand, and for one terrible moment the scene became so absurd that my mind almost rejected it. My husband was standing on another woman's porch, holding the hand of his secret son, while his mistress showed me forged separation papers that supposedly proved I had agreed to a life I had never known existed. This was madness. Not loud madness, not cinematic madness, but real adult madness, dressed in normal clothes, standing beside a child's scooter and a wreath on a blue front door. Daniel finally spoke, and his voice had that careful softness he used whenever he wanted to sound wounded instead of cornered. I never meant for you to see it like this. I laughed then once, and the sound surprised all of us because it did not sound like grief. It sounded like the last thread of obedience snapping. You never meant for me to see it at all. Marissa looked down at the paper again, and I saw the moment her own memories began rearranging, just like mine had in the kitchen. Every explanation Daniel had given her was now being measured against this porch, this wife, this child, this lie with a fake signature at the bottom. How much money did he tell you I got? I asked her. She swallowed. He said you received the larger share because of Sophie. I turned another page and found the financial section. According to the agreement, I had supposedly received $180,000 from a family trust, full ownership of our house, and no claim to any separate accounts Daniel maintained after the date of separation. The words blurred for a second. Family trust. My father's trust. The one Daniel had told me was basically gone after liens, repairs, legal fees, and taxes. The one I had been too grief-stricken to question because I was burying my father, recovering from surgery, raising Sophie, and believing my husband when he said he was protecting me from stress. I felt cold move through me despite the humid air. Daniel, I said slowly, where is my father's money? His face changed, and this time Marissa saw it too. That was the answer. Not all of it, but enough. I turned back to the house, to the new shutters, the clean porch, the child's boots by the door, the furniture visible through the front window, and suddenly everything looked different. This was not just Daniel's secret house. It was built, at least partly, from money my father had meant to leave to me and Sophie. My father, who used to save receipts in shoeboxes and call me every Sunday just to ask whether the car sounded okay. My father, who had slipped $20 bills into Sophie's birthday cards, even when cancer had already thinned his hands. My father, who once told Daniel after 2 beers at Thanksgiving that a man's first job was to make his family feel safe. Daniel had taken that safety and poured it into another life. Marissa pressed a hand over her mouth. I didn't know. I believed her, and I hated that I believed her because it made the pain messier. If she had known everything, I could have placed my anger neatly on both of them and walked away with clean hatred. But her face was collapsing under the same realization that had destroyed mine. Daniel had not chosen between 2 women. He had used both of us to protect himself. Noah began to cry then, softly at first, confused by the adult tension he could feel but not name. Daniel bent toward him, and the tenderness in that gesture nearly broke me, because he did love that child. I could see it. That was the ugliest part. He had not been pretending with Noah. He had simply decided Sophie could survive with less. Marissa lifted Noah into her arms and whispered something into his hair, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. There's more. I did not want there to be more. I wanted the story to have reached its worst point so I could begin hating it from a safe distance, but betrayal does not stop when the victim becomes tired. It stops when every hidden thing has finally been dragged into the light. She handed me one more document. It was not part of the separation packet. It was a beneficiary form connected to the private bank account, the same account that had shown more than $200,000. Daniel's name was listed as the owner, Marissa's as the primary beneficiary, and Noah's as the secondary beneficiary under a custodial designation. There was no mention of Sophie, no mention of me, no mention of the daughter who had given up dance classes, summer camp, new shoes, and small childhood joys because her father had convinced us there was nothing left. I looked at Daniel and my voice came out almost calm. You protected him. His eyes flicked toward Noah. Claire, you protected your son, I said, each word quieter than the last. With money you took from your daughter. Daniel's face hardened, and that was when I understood something I had not wanted to see. His shame had limits. Push past those limits, and what waited underneath was resentment. He was not only sorry he had hurt us. He was angry that I was making him feel like the kind of man who could. You don't understand what it's like, he said. I had responsibilities in both places. Both places. As if Sophie and I were one household on a spreadsheet, and Marissa and Noah were another, and Daniel had simply been doing his best to balance accounts. I folded the papers carefully, not because I felt calm, but because I needed my hands to do something controlled before my body gave out. Then I took out my phone and photographed every page. Daniel stepped forward. Claire, don't. Marissa moved between us before I could react, and for one shocked second, all three of us understood the shift. The woman he had hidden from me was now blocking him from the wife he had lied about. Let her take the pictures, Marissa said. Daniel stared at her like betrayal was something that had happened to him. I took the photos one by one, making sure every signature, date, and account number was clear. Then I sent them to my sister, my mother, and my work email with a subject line that made my hands shake. Daniel's documents. Do not delete. When I looked up, Daniel's expression had gone flat. That frightened me more than his panic. Because panic was human. That flatness was calculation. You're going to ruin everyone, he said. I looked at the blue house, at Marissa holding Noah, at the folder in my hands, and finally at the man who had made me feel poor, careless, and ungrateful while hiding my father's money behind another woman's front door. No, I said. I'm going to find out exactly what you stole. His phone started ringing then, loud and sudden in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and did not answer, but I saw the caller name before he turned it away. Whitmore Trust Office. Daniel rejected the call, but it was already too late because I had seen the name. Whitmore Trust Office. My father's name on my husband's phone felt more intimate than Marissa's messages, more violent than the affair itself, because my father had trusted Daniel in the quiet way old-fashioned men sometimes trust sons-in-law they want to believe are honorable. Why is the trust office calling you? I asked. Daniel put the phone into his pocket. Because I handle family paperwork. You handled it by telling me the money was gone. His eyes sharpened. Claire, think before you turn this into something criminal. That word gave him away. Criminal. I had not said it yet. Marissa stood on the porch holding Noah, her face drained of color, while the folder of fake documents shook slightly in my hand. She looked at Daniel like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and I could tell that part of her still wanted him to explain it in a way that would let her keep the life he had promised. I knew that feeling. It dies hard. My phone buzzed then. My sister, Rachel, had seen the photos I sent. Call me now. Do not leave alone with him. I stepped back toward my car, but Daniel followed. Claire, stop sending things to people. Why? Because you don't understand what you're doing. No, I said. I understand exactly what I'm doing now. I called Rachel from the driver's seat with the doors locked. Daniel stood outside the blue house, one hand on his hip, watching me like I was a problem he still thought he could solve. Marissa had taken Noah inside, but she stayed visible through the front window, phone pressed to her ear. Rachel answered on the first ring. What the hell is going on? She asked. I found the money, I said. And Dad's trust. The line went silent for 1 second too long. Then Rachel said, Claire, that's impossible. My stomach tightened. Why? Because the trust wasn't empty. I closed my eyes. She told me our father's attorney had called her 6 months after the funeral because Daniel had requested certain records. Rachel assumed he was helping me. Everyone assumed that because Daniel was polished, patient, and good with paperwork, And I was the grieving daughter who could barely open sympathy cards without crying. How much was there? I asked. Rachel exhaled hard. Around $180,000 after taxes. I looked through the windshield at the blue house, the porch, the shutters, the child's scooter, the life he built close enough to ours to mock me. He used it, I said. Rachel's voice changed. Claire, listened carefully. Dad named you and Sophie as beneficiaries. Daniel was never supposed to control that money alone. I opened my eyes. Daniel was still watching me. For the first time that day, he looked less angry and more afraid. Rachel told me to drive straight to her office. She worked in HR, not law, but her building had security, cameras, and a conference room where we could call an attorney without Daniel appearing in the doorway. I started the car and Daniel stepped closer, tapping once on the window. I lowered it only an inch. Come home, he said. We can talk without all this drama. All this drama is your second family standing behind you. His mouth tightened. Don't talk about Noah like that. That nearly broke something in me. Noah is innocent, I said. Sophie is innocent too. You only remembered one of them. He stepped back as if I had slapped him. I drove away before he could answer. At Rachel's office, everything moved quickly. We called an attorney named Denise Holloway, who asked direct questions and wasted no sympathy on dramatic pauses. She wanted bank names, account numbers, copies of signatures, trust documents, transfer records, and dates. When I told her about the forged separation agreement, she went quiet in a way that made my hands sweat. Claire, she said, this is not just divorce territory. I looked at Rachel. She was already crying but quietly, angrily. Denise told me not to return home without someone with me. She told me to freeze any joint cards I could access, pull Sophie's college account records, and save every text Daniel sent. Then she asked one question that made the room feel smaller. Does Daniel have Sophie's social security number and passport? I almost answered yes automatically because of course he did. He was her father. He had handled travel forms, tax filings, school paperwork, all the things I had been too tired to double-check. Then I remembered the phrase from Marissa's messages. After Sophie's school year. My mouth went dry. Rachel saw my face. What? I opened my banking app first, hands shaking now, and checked Sophie's college account. The balance should have been nearly $48,000. It was just over $6,000. I could not speak. Rachel took the phone from my hand, looked at the screen and whispered, he took Dad's money twice. That was when Daniel started calling. Once, twice, 5 times. Then a text came through. Do not involve lawyers. You'll regret making this ugly. A second message followed before I could breathe. And do not try to take Sophie from me. I stared at the words until Denise's voice came through the speaker, sharp and controlled. Claire, where is your daughter right now? I stood so fast the chair hit the wall behind me. Sophie was at school. And Daniel was still listed as an approved pickup. For a second, nobody in Rachel's conference room moved, because the simple fact that Sophie was at school suddenly felt dangerous in a way school should never feel. I called the front office with Denise still on speaker, and while the phone rang, I kept telling myself Daniel would not do anything that reckless. He had lied, stolen, forged, and built another life, but surely he would not walk into our daughter's school and use her as leverage because his secrets were finally breaking open. Then the receptionist answered. This is Claire Mason, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I need to make sure my daughter Sophie is still in class. There was a pause, then the sound of keys clicking. She was signed out about 15 minutes ago, the woman said. The room went silent around me. By who? I asked, though I already knew. Her father, she said. He said there was a family emergency. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my nails bent. Rachel grabbed her keys without waiting for me to ask, and Denise's voice cut through the speaker, calm but urgent, telling me to hang up, call 911, and not confront Daniel alone if I found him. I heard every word, but my mind was already outside that room, picturing Sophie walking beside him with her backpack, trusting him because children should be able to trust their fathers. I called Daniel from the parking lot. He answered on the 4th ring, and the first thing I heard was traffic. Where is she? I asked. She's with me, he said. She's fine. That was the wrong answer. A safe father would have said. I picked her up because I was worried. or I'm bringing her home, or even I made a mistake. Daniel said she was fine like he was proving possession. Put her on the phone. Not while you're acting like this. Rachel was driving fast, one hand on the wheel, the other clenched in her lap. I had Daniel on speaker, and I could feel my sister holding back every word she wanted to scream because Denise had told us to keep him talking. Daniel, I said, you took her out of school without telling me. I'm her father. And I'm her mother. He laughed once, bitter and low. You remember that now? Because this morning you were ready to destroy her family. The cruelty of that sentence was precise. He wanted me to defend myself, to become emotional, to give him proof that I was unstable. For once, I did not give him what he wanted. Where are you taking her? There was a pause. Then Sophie's small voice came through the background. Dad, why is Mom mad? My heart cracked so sharply I almost dropped the phone. Daniel lowered his voice, but not enough. Because your mom is confused right now. Rachel whispered a curse under her breath. I closed my eyes for half a second, then opened them because fear needed somewhere to go. Daniel, do not use our daughter to punish me. I'm protecting her from what you're doing. No, I said. You're protecting yourself. He hung up. I called 911 while Rachel drove to our house, because that was the only place I could imagine him going. On the way I tried Sophie's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her anyway, simple words because panic makes messages dangerous. Sweetheart, I love you. Call me when you can. No answer. When we pulled onto our street, Daniel's truck was in the driveway. The front door was half open. I nearly ran inside, but Rachel grabbed my arm and held me back until the police car arrived behind us. Those few minutes felt endless, and I remember staring at the house where I had packed lunches, paid bills, and tried to make a good life out of whatever Daniel allowed me to know. Then Sophie appeared in the doorway. She was crying, but she was alone. I pushed past every warning and ran to her. She held on to me so tightly that I could feel her whole body shaking through her school hoodie. Behind her, Daniel stood at the bottom of the stairs with a black suitcase beside him, looking furious in a controlled, wounded way that made him appear almost reasonable to people who had not read the documents. I was packing some things, he told the officer. Claire is overreacting. The officer looked at the suitcase. Sir, step away from the bag. Daniel's face changed. Just enough. Inside were folders, cash envelopes, Sophie's birth certificate, her passport, several account statements, and a small stack of documents tied with a rubber band. On top was a printed email from the Whitmore Trust office. I saw my father's name. Then I saw Marissa's address. Denise had told me not to touch anything, so I stood there with Sophie pressed against my side while the officer photographed the contents. Daniel kept talking, calmly at first, then faster, saying those papers belonged to him, saying he had rights, saying I was poisoning everyone against him. But the more he spoke, the less anyone answered. That was when Sophie pulled something from her backpack with trembling hands. Mom, she whispered. Dad told me not to show you this. It was a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a signed form from 3 months earlier. According to the document, I had agreed to transfer Sophie's remaining college money into an account controlled by Daniel. And beneath my forged signature was the name of a witness I recognized immediately. Marissa Vale. I stared at Marissa's name on that document until the letters stopped looking like letters and became something sharper, because after everything Daniel had done, some part of me had still believed Marissa had been standing on the other side of his lie, not helping him sign it. Sophie was pressed against my side, crying quietly into my sweater, while the officer held the paper under the hallway light and asked if I recognized the signature. I recognized the name, but the signature beneath it looked too neat, too controlled, and suddenly I understood that Daniel might not have only forged my name. He might have forged hers too. Call Marissa, I said. Daniel's head snapped toward me. Don't bring her into this. The officer looked at him. Sir, step back. Daniel obeyed, but his face had gone hard in that flat, dangerous way again, the way it had on Marissa's porch after I started photographing the papers. He was not panicking anymore. He was measuring damage. Rachel dialed Marissa from my phone and put it on speaker. She answered quickly, her voice already shaky. Claire, did you witness a transfer form for Sophie's college account 3 months ago? I asked. There was a pause, then a confused breath. What transfer form? Daniel looked away. That was all I needed. I read the title of the document aloud, then the date, then the line where her name appeared as witness. When I finished, Marissa said nothing for several seconds, and in that silence I heard the last wall between us break. She had not been innocent in everything. She had stayed with a man she knew was still legally tangled to a wife, even if he lied about the details. But she had not signed that paper. I never witnessed anything for Sophie, she said finally. I never even knew there was a college account. The officer took the phone from Rachel and asked Marissa if she would be willing to make a statement. She said yes before he finished the sentence, and Daniel let out a short laugh, not amused, not sorry, just bitter. Unbelievable, he said. You're all turning this into a crime scene. Rachel looked at him with pure disgust. You packed your daughter's passport in a suitcase full of stolen documents. I didn't steal anything, he snapped. Sophie flinched. That stopped the whole room. Daniel saw it too, and for a moment his face changed, almost softened, as if he had finally noticed that the child he claimed to protect was standing 5 feet away from him, afraid of his voice. He took one step toward her, but Sophie moved behind me before I could even tell her to. That movement broke him more than anything I said. He whispered her name. She did not answer. The officers asked Daniel to sit in the living room while they finished documenting the suitcase. He tried to argue, then remembered he was in front of witnesses and performed cooperation so quickly it made me sick. His voice became smooth again. His hands stayed visible. His tone turned wounded and reasonable. I knew that version. That version had fooled teachers, neighbors, bankers, my mother, my father, and me. But it did not fool Sophie anymore. While Rachel took her upstairs to pack a small overnight bag, I stood in the kitchen with one officer and gave the cleanest version of the story I could. I told him about the hidden account, the forged separation agreement, my father's trust, the blue house, the drained college fund, and Daniel taking Sophie out of school without telling me. I did not mention how my chest hurt every time I said my father's name. I did not explain how humiliation feels when it has receipts. I just gave facts. Facts were safer than grief. Marissa arrived 20 minutes later with Noah asleep in the back seat of her car and a folder on her lap. She would not come inside at first. She stood on the porch, pale and tense, staring past me into the house like Daniel might still have the power to pull her back into his version of the world. I found more, she said. Daniel heard her voice from the living room and stood so fast one officer turned toward him. Marissa, do not say another word, he called. She looked at him through the open door, and for the first time, I saw something like anger steady her. You used my name, she said. You used my child. You used hers. Daniel's face twisted. I took care of you. No, she said, holding up the folder. You bought silence with money that wasn't yours. The officer asked her to step into the kitchen, and Marissa handed over copies of emails Daniel had sent from a second account under a business name I did not recognize. Some were to lenders. Some were to the trust office. Some were to a man named Eric Lawson, who seemed to help Daniel create documents that looked official enough to survive casual questions. Then I saw one email subject line, asset protection before filing. My stomach tightened. The message was dated 8 months earlier, long before I found the bank statement, long before Daniel claimed everything had gotten out of hand. In the email, Daniel wrote that he needed to protect funds from his wife before initiating divorce because she had limited financial understanding and would become emotionally reactive if she learned about the other household. I read that line 3 times. Limited financial understanding, emotionally reactive. That was how he had translated my trust into weakness. Marissa watched my face while I read. He told me you were unstable, she said quietly. He said you would use Sophie against him if you found out about Noah. I folded the paper carefully and set it on the counter. He told me we were poor. Neither of us said anything after that, because there was nothing clean to say. We had both been given roles in Daniel's private script, and both roles were designed to keep him at the center while we carried the shame. The officers did not arrest him that night. Not in the dramatic way I wanted some broken part of me to witness. They said there would be reports, follow-ups, financial investigation, and emergency custody steps. Real consequences moved slower than pain, and I hated that. But Daniel was told not to remove anything else from the house, not to contact me except through attorneys, and not to pick Sophie up from school until custody was addressed. He looked humiliated when the officer said it, and I realized humiliation was the closest thing to accountability he could feel quickly. When he packed a small bag under supervision, he paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Sophie, who stood beside Rachel with red eyes and both hands wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. "I love you," he said. Sophie stared at the floor. Then she asked very softly, "Did you take Grandpa's money?" No one moved. Daniel opened his mouth, but no answer came out. That silence did more damage than any confession. After he left, the house felt huge and contaminated, like every room had been touched by a secret. Sophie and I went to Rachel's that night, and I slept on the couch outside her guest room because Sophie asked me not to be too far away. She woke up twice crying, and both times she asked whether we were going to lose the house. I told her the truth as gently as I could. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but you will not lose me." The next morning, Denise filed emergency motions. By noon, Daniel's known accounts were flagged. The school had written instructions, and Rachel took me to meet a forensic accountant who looked too calm for the kind of wreckage I brought him. His name was Paul. He spent 40 minutes reviewing the statements before he stopped on one page and frowned. "What?" I asked. He turned the paper toward me and pointed to a recurring transfer hidden under a vendor name. Every month, for almost 2 years, money had been moving from Daniel's private account into something labeled Cedar Ridge Holdings. I did not recognize it. Neither did Rachel. Paul typed the name into a business database, waited for the result, then looked up at me with an expression that made my whole body go cold. "Claire," he said, "this company owns a storage unit facility outside Raleigh." I leaned closer. He clicked one more document. Daniel was listed as the authorized user on a unit rented under Cedar Ridge Holdings, and the access log showed he had entered it the night before I found the bank statement. I thought the Blue House had been the end of Daniel's second life, but the storage unit outside Raleigh proved he had been preparing for something beyond an affair. Denise told me not to go there alone, and this time I listened. By late afternoon, she had arranged for a court order to preserve whatever was inside the unit, and Paul came with us because he understood the financial trail better than anyone. Rachel drove, Sophie stayed with my mother, and I sat in the passenger seat with Daniel's old texts open on my phone, reading the same sentence again and again. "You'll regret making this ugly." The storage facility sat behind a gas station and a strip mall, the kind of place you pass without noticing because it looks too ordinary to hold anything important. The manager unlocked the unit while an officer stood beside us, and when the metal door rolled up, the sound scraped through me like a warning. Inside were 12 plastic bins, a small fireproof safe, 3 banker's boxes, and one framed photograph turned face down on top of a folded moving blanket. The first box held tax records. The second held bank statements. The third held copies of documents I had already seen, including the forged separation agreement, the fake transfer form for Sophie's college account, and emails between Daniel and Eric Lawson about making everything look clean before filing. Then Paul opened a bin marked office supplies, and nobody spoke for a full minute. Inside were envelopes of cash, stacked neatly in rubber bands. Not millions, not movie money, but enough to prove intent. $46,000 in 20s and hundreds, beside a folder labeled C. M. Timeline. T. M. Claire Mason. My life had been reduced to initials on a folder in a storage unit. Inside was a printed schedule of my work hours, Sophie's school calendar, notes about my mother's address, and a list of accounts Daniel believed I did not know existed. One page had bullet points for divorce strategy, written in his tight, careful handwriting. "Claire will panic. Claire does not understand investments. Offer house equity if she stops asking about trust. Keep Sophie stable until school year ends." I stared at that last line until my eyes burned. He had not been trying to keep Sophie stable. He had been trying to keep her available, useful, and emotionally close enough that he could still look like a good father when everything else collapsed. Rachel found the framed photograph under the blanket. It was not of Marissa. It was not of Noah. It was a family photo of me, Daniel, and Sophie from 3 Christmases earlier, taken in front of our fireplace. I remembered that day because I had cried in the bathroom before the picture, ashamed that I could not afford the gifts Sophie wanted. Daniel had held my waist in the photo, smiling like a man with no secrets. On the back in black marker he had written, "Before Claire ruined everything." Rachel whispered my name, but I could not answer. Something in me went quiet then, not broken exactly but finished. Until that moment, I had still been searching for the version of Daniel who had fallen into lies and lost his way. That sentence on the back of our family photo killed him for me. It proved he had not simply betrayed me. He had needed me to become the villain so he could survive seeing himself clearly. The investigation moved slowly after that, but it moved. The cash was documented, the accounts were traced, Eric Lawson cooperated once his own name appeared too many times, and Daniel's story changed so often that even people who wanted to believe him stopped trying. Marissa gave everything she had. I did not forgive her completely, but I stopped needing her to be the only woman in the wrong. Daniel had made a system out of deception. We had both lived inside it. The divorce was final almost a year later. Sophie's college money was restored through a settlement, part of my father's trust was recovered, and the house was sold because I could no longer sleep in rooms where every quiet corner felt like it might be hiding paper. Daniel got supervised visitation at first. Later, that changed, carefully and slowly, because Sophie loved him and feared him in the confusing way children sometimes do when a parent breaks the world but still knows their favorite cereal. I hated that for her. I respected it anyway. Marissa moved away with Noah before summer. She sent me one letter, handwritten, apologizing without asking for friendship. I read it once, folded it, and put it in a box with the legal papers. Some things do not need to be answered to be finished. Sophie and I moved into a smaller townhouse near her school, with thin walls, ugly kitchen tile, and a porch just big enough for 2 chairs. On our first night there, she asked if we were poor now. I told her the truth. No. We are rebuilding. She nodded like she understood, then asked if she could paint her room yellow. I said yes before checking the price. Months later, after everything was signed, sealed, and supposedly over, I received one last envelope with no return address. Inside was a copy of a bank statement from an account I had never seen before, under a business name Daniel had never mentioned. The balance was small, only $312.44. But at the bottom, there was one transfer from the week before I found that first statement. To Cedar Ridge Holdings, final removal fee. No note, no explanation. Just proof that Daniel may have emptied one last thing before anyone reached it. I kept that page for a while, then stopped looking at it. Not because it did not matter, but because I finally understood something I wish I had known sooner. Some people do not confess because the truth heals. They confess only when every hiding place is gone. And Daniel had spent years building hiding places. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that I had spent those same years surviving on less, learning how to stretch money, silence, patience, and fear until they became something stronger than trust. They became instinct. And the day that first bank statement arrived, my instinct finally woke up. A year later, Sophie and I were standing in our new kitchen, painting an old bookshelf yellow because she said the room needed something cheerful. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from an unknown number. No name, no greeting, just one photo, a storage unit door, and under it one sentence. He didn't empty the last one. I stared at the screen for a long time, while Sophie hummed beside me, completely unaware that the past had found one more crack to crawl through. Then I turned the phone face down. Not because I was afraid, because for the first time in years, I understood that Daniel's secrets no longer had the power to move me before I chose to move. I picked up the paintbrush, smiled at my daughter, and kept painting. But later that night, after Sophie fell asleep, I opened the photo again. And this time, I noticed something in the corner of the image. A small cardboard box, with my father's handwriting on the side. For Claire when she's ready.